So just to add the proof that we are living in a very weird time pop culturally, it was noted this weekend as two big things started the end of their cycle, which is we got the trailer for Star Wars Episode 9, which is the end of the Skywalker saga. And then we also got the first episode of the final season of Game of Thrones. And then at the end of this month, of course, we also have Marvel Endgame, which is going to be the culmination of 11 years of Marvel, right? The Marvel Cinematic Universe. So all of this is interesting because these are two very, I don't know what they're called, the 2010s. They're, it's that decade, very defining, very high profile pop culture things that are all winding down, at least as we know them now, right? We know that there are more Star Wars movies coming, one trilogy which will be by the Game of Thrones guys. We got more movies coming after Endgame, and Game of Thrones is also going to have their own prequel sequels of some kind that HBO are going to do. But basically, everything as we know them now is all grinding to a halt. So very interesting to think about as this season, of course, starts to wrap up as well. From the way things are looking in this season of Discovery, it looks like next season could be very, very different, depending on how things end up and work out. The only thing that kind of gives it away that they might be surviving whatever happens at the end of this season is that Spock is on board. If Spock wasn't on board, you could have a very Voyager type ending, or you could have, where they end up in some future universe, but they're going around and things are different.
Yeah, so there's I realize there's a logic hole here.
Mm-hmm.
So she's going through in the suit, right? She was going to be stuck.
And she's supposed to be pulling the Discovery with her.
Right. And so they're going to crew the Discovery, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Which seems like a tremendous complication in terms of, what they're going into. They don't know, right?
Right. The future somewhere. Well, somewhere in time, basically.
Right. And it's supposed to be, I guess, far in advance, right? It's not.
Yeah, 1,000 years.
Well, yeah, you don't want to go a week and a half.
Probably not far enough.
Yeah, because Control will just be there.
Yeah.
They'll just hang out for a week and a half. So, sending all these people, including Spock, right? Because, of course, once Spock goes, we know where Spock ends up in 10 years.
True.
So now it becomes, at that moment, you're like, oh, well, they're all coming back. Mm-hmm. They have to now because Spock's on board. And in one sense, maybe that's why you sent Spock, because we're not signaling that they're going to get lost, right?
Right.
And season 3 will be, Burnham wandering through the 28th century,
Right.
Trying to make her way. So, it's oh no, they're all coming back. Look, I mean, key characters, characters anchored into the current timeline are coming back. So don't worry about it. This is a dramatic, how will they do it problem, not a what's going to happen problem. Anyway, that was my.
So luckily, for us, we don't have to choose what the next pop culture zeitgeist is going to be. That's not what we do here. We discuss Discovery. So here we are, the Brothers Who Trek About, talking about Discovery, the episode Such Sweet Sorrow, That's all of that line we're getting. Quick introductions. My name is Matt, coming to you from Austin, and coming to us from Houston is my brother Ken. Say hello, Ken.
Peace and long life.
Go. So obviously, the name of this episode comes from a Shakespeare line from Romeo and Juliet, which is, "Parting is such sweet sorrow, that I shall say good night till be tomorrow." So there you go. That's a little Juliet line there, saying to her Romeo. So we talked a little bit about the time travel, where we think they'll end up. I think we'll get back into that as we get towards the end of the episode. But let's talk about the big reveal in this episode, which is the new Enterprise bridge. What did you think of that one?
The whole ship, it looked gorgeous. So
yeah,
I read the interview with the person who's in charge of the overall look and feel, the visual, right?
Yeah.
For the series, and she was of course very enthusiastic having an opportunity to redesign the Enterprise, and what she wanted to do is make it so that when you look at it, you instantly go, "That's the Enterprise." Mm-hmm. Right? She's like, "We have seen Enterprises that don't much look like the original series. I wanted this to look like the original series, not some other iteration or some unique iteration. But at the same time, it has to look like it belongs in the Discovery universe."
Right.
So we have that wacky bridge that Scotty goes on in that Next Generation episode, Relics.
Yep.
Which looks like the 1967, bridge, right?
Yeah.
And, that's not what they were going for. They don't want to, have something that looks weird, oddly, like out of sync with the... So she wants it, on the one hand, to look like it belongs in this universe, but also instantly recognizable as the Enterprise. And then, the bridge changed, right? Periodically, they would redress it, they would reset it, we know that lights changed, that sometimes things look more yellow, sometimes things look more green. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, to talk about the, Kirk's tunic was supposed to be green, but the lights made it look yellow, gold, right? Mm-hmm. These panels originally were red, but these same yellow lights made them look orange, right? So she's designing these red panels, and of course we get this line from Giorgio, "Orange? Really?"
Yeah.
So this is a question of these lights that were used in the production. So, they kind of picked, some things that are authentic that we look at and go, "Oh yeah, that's the ship." So I loved it. I thought this felt like it was the Enterprise.
Yeah, it looked great, I thought.
I was very impressed.
Because it looked enough like the original. Obviously, there's a lot of things that, like, where the elevator or the turbo lift was, the guardrails or whatever those things are that were around the bridge, and everything else was generally in the same place. So you kind of got the sense like, okay, yeah, this is exactly like the old bridge. I remember how this works. So yeah, I totally dug it. And obviously the exterior, which we got to talk a little bit about last season, I thought that also looked brilliant as well.
Yep. I mean, it's really only one other thing that, like, you'd look at and go, this would be like the engine room, right?
Yeah.
Because if they redress the quarters and they look different, you're like, everyone's quarters kind of look different anyway. And we did actually see Spock's quarters because Burnham goes on there when she was looking for the Red Angel clues.
Yep.
And of course, his quarters didn't look like they did in the show. But that wasn't like a big deal. People redecorate all the time.
I thought the engine engine room on Discovery kind of looks like the old one. It has that panel up there with the V shape and so that one kind of. But the other thing I thought that really helped the bridge was just the sound effects.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? They hit the woo and everything else. It was like perfect. You're like, okay, you nailed all the sounds of the bridge. Good job.
And people being in the colors, right?
Right. Yes.
When they're in those bold colors, it helps it to look like this is. And I like the uniform that we saw it best on Pike, I think, because we got some good close-ups of him in it. And this is the solution that I've used in Star Trek Online.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, you can get the classic uniform, right? But then, like other characters, if they haven't done certain things and earned those things, or you didn't buy them or whatever, I would take some other thing and I would just put it, make all the panels the color that I thought, the gold or the red or the blue, and that's basically what he's got. You can tell it's textured differently.
Yeah.
Right. It looks like the modern uniforms that we've been seeing in JJ Trek or other kinds of more modern Star Trek.
Well, even too, they look like the Discovery. They've got the shoulder pads or whatever going on. Yeah. They got the neck thing, whatever that is. They're just in the original series colors.
Right.
Yeah, I think they look great.
So I think it was a good solution.
How about those new like docking rings that connected the two ships? That was cool with the force field and everything. You're like, okay, that's a very now way of thinking how we're gonna be able to as opposed to big. I don't know. I can't remember. They did it in one of the movies, didn't they? Or one of the shows where they had to connect two ships and it was like a tube or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember. But yeah, just the idea of using the force fields was like, okay, that's pretty brilliant.
Yeah, I think we've got more of a sense that you're going to use energy stuff to solve them rather than doing something we might do today.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, go ahead.
There's always that group of people. You brought up some Star Wars earlier, and I don't know how much this affects the Marvel universe, but I think there's some of it in Game of Thrones. Where you've got people who are always dissatisfied, and we've talked about that, on this podcast going all the way back. And, I think part of it is, are you going to make the perfect the enemy of the good? Because if you are, then you can easily find yourself dissatisfied with stuff that's quite good.
Uh-huh.
Because it's not what you imagined. It's not the way it was when you first saw it. It's not the way it was in your childhood.
Right.
It's not the way it was, in your unicorn conception, right? Unicorns are real. You can imagine them. And when we talk about them, we both know what we're talking about. It's a horse with a horn on its head. Right? But they don't really exist. And you can't like go out and go, well, this is it. And that's Star Trek, right? That's Star Wars. That's Westeros. It's whatever. These various universes. They exist because we can imagine them, but you can't go and say, no, look, Kirk actually does this, right? Mm-hmm. His uniform is actually made of this material. So what you're left with is like picking and choosing between various iterations as though that's real and the other ones are bad. And instead of saying, I want good Star Trek, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be perfect Star Trek because my perfect is different than your perfect is different from the next guy's perfect.
Yeah.
It just needs to be good. I want to be entertained. I want to go, I recognize this as Star Trek, or there's enough Star Trek elements that I can buy in to the Star Trekness of it. I don't need some kind of perfect Star Trek to enjoy Star Trek.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, like I said, the first episode of season 8 of Game of Thrones has started, and already you're seeing people online like, okay, I'm giving them one episode for setup, but boy, if that next episode doesn't click the way I want it to, and I'm like, well, okay, so first of all, we're in the first episode of the season, right? We got to get everybody, like this episode, right, where we got to put everybody in the place they're going to be for the next big thing to happen, right? So in this case, we're getting everybody in well, here, I'll just use the case of this show, right? We got to get everybody who's going to be on the Discovery. We got to get everybody who's on the Enterprise here. We got to get Burnham set, ready to go. We got to get Tyler going off to do whatever he's going to do at the end of this episode. So we got to put everybody in the places they're going to be so that the next episode, which in this case is going to be, the finale, we got to just chest move everybody into those spots. So maybe the beginning of this episode, maybe some people found this episode like, okay, let's just get to it. I didn't, but Game of Thrones is the same way. They're setting up for this huge battle that's going to be happening. My guess is episode 3. And so, it's like, well, we got to get everybody there. We got to get everybody in place. We got to have some reunions happen because some of these characters haven't seen each other in 10 years. So let's, get Arya and Jon Snow back together, chit-chatting and, all these other people. Let's do this, So So yeah, people are going to complain about anything, no matter what, even if it's something that's as forgivable as like, you got to give us a couple episodes for setup here. Come on, we got some other things to take care of. We got some character relationships, like in this episode, that we have to end, or not end, but wrap up.
Right. Prepare them to go to the next phase, whatever that's going to be.
Exactly. And this note was going to come later, but I'll just say it now. It's like the goodbye that Pike has, right? It's probably because story-wise, we're not going to have any time next episode to do it because we got all the action happening. And if they do end up in the future or something, there's no way that Pike's going to be able to have not only the goodbye to, the crew, but the goodbye to us, right? Because we all want everybody to say goodbye to Pike in the right way. So, hey, let's do it in this episode before stuff happens. Mm-hmm. Aces in their places, man. We got to get them all there. That's it.
That's right. And, I thought we had a lot of good character notes.
Mm-hmm. Right? Oh, yeah.
So plot-wise, yeah, it kind of felt like what we're basically doing is, sending everybody off in their various directions, and there wasn't a lot of action.
Right.
But in terms of character, right, everyone was kind of like something big is going to happen. And for them, it was, well, Burnham's going to go off into the future. And I was like, well, I don't think that's going to, that's not a permanent thing because Spock is going with him and so forth.
Yes.
But something big's going to happen. We're going to confront Section 31. We're going to resolve the season, however that's going to go. It's going to be big and exciting. Let everyone do their stuff. And I thought some of those pieces were really, really good.
Yeah.
The Stamets and Culper, they kind of said goodbye in a way that was both believable and emotionally tense. And they both wanted to be nice to each other, but they were both saying, listen,
we're moving on. We're going forward.
Yeah. And you had that fun business with that Tilly and her person from her short track.
Yep.
Yeah. Shows back up and we get that back. I love how they use it. Like they use clips from the short trek in the
previews
last time on Star Trek. So that was fun. And there were all these good character pieces. And I thought that was great because we want the characters to move. Right. We don't want the characters to feel like no matter what happens, they're always the same. That's one of, the weak points of the way television worked in the 60s. Mm-hmm. That Star Trek, despite being trapped in the 60s and not being able to really think outside that particular box and change, nevertheless makes their characters change. Right? Because inadvertently, they begin to build lore. They introduce Sarek, and they can't unintroduce him. And they realize he's a good character, so you want to bring him back.
Yeah.
And when you do, you're like, well, we've already kind of established Spock and Sarek's relationship. And, we now live in a world way, way past that. Mm-hmm. And so we're getting this much richer characterization of this goodbye, rather than like a klaxon goes off, everyone runs, and then it's just on to the next battle.
Yes. Well, not to beat a dead horse like we tend to do from time to time, but one of the great examples that you always, that you pointed out was City on the Edge of Forever, right? Where we get to the end of the episode, he's lost Edith Keeler, and all we get from that last moment is, let's get the hell out of here, you know? Where, it would have been nice to have a whole other episode where he's like, God, did I do the right thing? And, Spock's in the room going like, hey, yeah, you did. Of course, sir, you did the right thing. You needed to get rid of Edith. We wouldn't all be here if you weren't. Yep. So
not only Kirk would have to work through it, but McCoy would.
Yes.
Because he was, still under the influence of his recovery. He didn't know what was going on.
Yep.
He's just like, well, here I am, and I don't quite understand why I'm here, and it's all, maybe I'm crazy.
Yeah.
And then, you got to rescue her. Jim, what are you doing? Why are you holding me back? Oh, my God, what happened? And then someone's got to explain it to him, and he's got to go through his own, way of thinking about it. So you'd have both of those characters doing it differently, interestingly, interacting, while Spock at the same time is trying to be like,
we need to write that book. That should be the next book. Well, there's like 3 things that could have jumped off back into this episode, but now I can't remember any of them since I jumped off onto Edith Keeler there. But I like that Burnham she's looking at the time crystal at the beginning, and she basically says to Pike, there has to be more to this. This thing can't just be about endings. It can't be about the end of my mom, the end of Discovery, the end of all of this, which I think is something we'll probably end up learning by the next episode, possibly. This isn't just an ending, it's a beginning to blah, blah, blah. Which is also very Trek, I feel like, right? That's like the end of Star Trek 2. This isn't just the end of Spock, but it's the beginning of a whole new world. Although they go back on that in the next, when they blow up said world.
Although they also, like the thing with Spock, that took a long time to resolve.
Yeah.
I mean, he was still not quite himself, like two movies later.
Yeah. Which is great. I love that whole arc just continued throughout the movies. So Burnham, by the way, has that flash forward where all things have gone bad. We don't see the full one yet, but early in the episode, she has just a couple of flashes there, and then later we get that extended one where she sees Leland break in and just like mow down everybody, which is interesting because they get to the point, maybe I should have saved this for later, but screw it. We get to the point later where everybody on the crew's like, no, we're coming with you. Hey, we're all for one and one for all. We're the crew of Discovery. We're sticking with Discovery and blah, blah, blah. She should have been like, no, I've seen what the future shows. You all are here. You all are basically going to die. I don't need any of you here with me. I need to do this by myself. But, at least then to her, because that's been the whole thing, right? Is can she change the future? Can what we've seen be undone? And so basically by her allowing everybody to come along, she's basically like, well, I know we're all going to be in serious trouble and we'll all die because Leland kills everybody, It's interesting she didn't make the other choice of like, no, you all got to go. You can't go. Bye. Go away. Get off the ship. So they can't blow up the ship because the sphere data is protecting itself.
They also never try to communicate with the ship. They never go, well, apparently the computer is alive, right?
Mm-hmm.
The sphere data or whatever. So let's tell it what's going on. And say, you need to get out of here. You need to do X, Y, and Z. You can't let control get you because then this bad thing will happen and then see what, the risk, of course, is that maybe the sphere data be like, I'd be perfectly happy marrying control.
Yeah, right. That's a good point. Well, another point too about the sphere data is the idea that in the future, so we get Calypso, right? This is all going to tie into Calypso somehow, especially if we're going 1,000 years in the future. So it's possible that part of the way that Calypso's discovery becomes, autonomous, becomes AI, true AI, is because it mixes with the sphere data.
Right.
Like that could be how it, got to where it is in that short trek.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure that is in one future of Discovery. The question is are we there yet? Are we going into the future and the ship stays, but somehow the people come back? I don't know how that would work.
Right.
Although, who knows what the sphere data could do? We could get a Deus Ex Machina where the sphere is like, thank you for, saving me. Now I will send you back home. Beep! Enter through the door to your own timeline. You're like, okay. But it's also possible that the ship comes back.
Yeah.
That they defeat Control and they're able to come back and, Discovery has another season in the original ship. But they could do a whole other ship. That wouldn't be.
Absolutely. Discovery A.
Yep.
So speaking of Calypso, this episode was actually directed by the same person who directed Calypso, which is Altunde Osinsami. Mm-hmm. There you go. You try and say it, but that's the name. He directed Calypso. He also directed this episode. We also get an interesting moment. So me, I love time travel. So of course, this and whatever happens in the next episode, I'm super excited to see. I love to see how it all is gonna work out for us. But we get a moment in early on before the credits where Burnham sees them sees them try to blow up Discovery. Discovery won't blow up. Then tries to shoot the torpedoes, and the torpedoes are shielded. And so then they're doing what they can, and then she gets the moment where she sees everything. That's when we get the big moment happen. And then when she comes back, it's after they try and self-destruct the ship, but before they use the torpedoes. It's interesting why she went back to that moment. It's like there had to have been a reason, but it wasn't anything that was explained, at least in this episode. So I'll be interested to see if we get something about that. Back from the opening credits, but before a commercial, we get what do we call the scenes when they're all in like the boardroom and they're all talking?
Yeah,
meeting room.
Conference room scene.
Conference room. There we go. Sure, we'll say it's that. So we get a conference room scene here where they're starting to talk about, break down the ideas, where we're at, where we're going, what we have to get done. They basically come up with the idea that, well, we know that Burnham's mom didn't send the signal, so that means it must be Burnham who's going to send the signals. We just don't know why. So she's got to be the one to go. Not to mention that her DNA is the only other one that'll match the DNA in the suit, so it can't be Pike who goes, even though he offers. It has to be Burnham for all of those reasons. And then we get a signal, and we end up at the planet with the Queen, Poe. Poe, our queen from Tilly Short, arrives, loving ice cream just as much as she did before. I love, too, that scene where Pike's trying to be all formal, but is immediately undercut by Poe going, Tilly! It's so great. We get the Culber and Stamets scene, which you've already talked a little bit about. It's, them deciding to move on with their lives, to keep going forward. The advice that Cornwell gave to Culber a few episodes back. We also find out that Culber is going to predate McCoy on the Enterprise, so that'll be interesting.
Oh yeah, that's because we've got the original Doctor, right? Who we just see in the cage. And so then you got Culper. He'll be our Doctor in between that guy and McCoy.
McCoy, yeah, apparently.
I mean, theoretically, could have somebody else in there, but who cares? That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, that was really cool. I like that. We get one full scene of technobabble, and we find out that Burnham is stuck with a one-way ticket to the future. There might not be any way back. Let's go back to that Chosen One prophecy. Who's going to save the world again? Looks like it's going to be girls. Michael Burnham.
Well, they do put a lot of weight on this one character, right? So, whereas
she is the lead.
She is, right?
Yeah.
And because we're not focusing on the captain, we're putting more on this one character rather than having an ensemble in the way that, like the original Trek, in which we've talked about the network wanted, where's our captain? What's our captain doing? How come our captain doesn't do more?
Yep.
And the actual creators had discovered, this wonderful dynamic between Spock, McCoy, and Kirk. And you get this powerful trilogy that does everything and goes everywhere. And even then, they're not doing everything, because you will sometimes leave McCoy on the ship or leave Spock on the ship and get other interesting dynamics. But it's an ensemble, right? And then by Next Generation, it's a real ensemble, right? I think at the very end, and by that I mean season 7 and especially the movies, I do think they get a little bit too much Picard and Data.
Yes.
But taken as a whole, that's an ensemble show.
Yeah.
It really is. And this is less so. Michael Burnham is the star. Everything revolves around Michael Burnham. In the way, if this were Columbo, everything revolves around Columbo.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, when television has a star, that kind of stuff happens. And of course, original Star Trek, everyone thought at NBC that William Shatner was the star. So they were sending these notes. But of course, in this case, it's different. So that's one of the ways in which it doesn't quite feel quite Star Trek-y. right? Because we're used to that ensemble. But of
Right.
course, that's just one way of telling the story. There's other things going on, other ways to tell these stories.
Yeah, and we're still using those other characters. I mean,
Oh,
again, we
yeah.
did lose Tilly last week, but she's here with Poe, and then we've got obviously Pike's doing all the cool stuff he's doing, and
It's way more of an ensemble show than Columbo was.
yes, yes, and even really than the original Star Trek. I mean, you had the big three in the original series, and then you had your Chekhovs and blah blah blah. But very rarely did Chekhov get a love interest. Well, Chekhov got a love interest. I'd say Sulu. It was very rare that Sulu got a love interest. So
Chekhov did get a love interest like right away in the apple.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Which is coming up very soon when we get back to the original series. I think it's 2 episodes away. I think the first one we're doing is, we talked about this last week, but Nomad. It's Nomad. And then the next episode after that is the Apple. So 3 episodes away for us will be Chekhov and his girlfriend. So it's going to be great. During my second watch through of this episode, it occurred to me, I already talked about Pike's, big goodbye that he gets in this episode, but there's also a moment when Burnham gets hers, which is interesting, and then made me wonder if, maybe Burnham does end up in the future possibly by herself, and then maybe Spock thinks that she's gone forever, which could be
right
why they never talk about her. It's like a sore subject. It's also why Amanda's never like, have you talked to your sister? It's because it's like, you couldn't have talked to your sister because your sister is dead. So it's just another possibility there as to why, if they end up very Voyager-like, instead of in the Delta or the Gamma Quadrant, they end up in the 1,000 years in the future and go on that journey, which would be interesting. But if they decide to do that, but also could be why we never hear about Burnham again, because it's a poor, touchy subject with old Spock there. Poe decides that she's going to stay on board because they're a team. Georgiou tries to talk Burnham out of this mission, calling her a martyr and selfless, as if those are insults. That's the way she says them. It's funny. She's like, no, look, if I make it back, you can talk about all my character flaws later. I like that. Oh, and then we get this really cool shot where we get to look through the windows of the Discovery. You just see people walking by in them and stuff. That was a really cool shot. I really like that one. And then Sarek and Amanda suddenly appear. We saw at the beginning of this episode, he's on a beach and suddenly he touches her Katra and realizes what's about to happen. So him and Amanda make a run out there to say their goodbyes. A lot of great bits in this scene, Sarek admitting that he hasn't always been the greatest father, hasn't been the greatest husband. That was kind of neat. Burnham thanks them for putting her back together when she was broken. Amanda says of Sarek, you're impossible. He said, I would accept improbable. We also get a nice moment here, too, where Burnham says, please watch over Spock. And he's like, of course, I'll always be there for my son. I've kept my distance as he's asked. Which, again, takes me right to Journey to Babel, right? Where we see Sarek for the first time. And he's like, doesn't even look at him. It's not like he's purposely ignoring him. It's like he's purposely ignoring him. I guess it's hard to tell which way he's looking. But it does in that episode very much feel like he's avoiding Spock as opposed to Spock not wanting to talk to him. And that scene, too, just fades out as Sarek moves in to, kind of go around them both, or at least just touch her. We don't quite get it, but we know it's going to happen. So we've already hit on it a little bit, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about the idea of the, entire crew joining on board. Because when I first watched it, I was like, this seems really ridiculous to me that not the entire bridge crew, if not, and everybody else is like, hey, we're going to come along. We're going to help you out. We're going to get behind you and blah, blah, blah. Because I felt like that's just silly. It could be a one-way trip. It could be a blah, blah, blah. It just felt too much like we just want everybody to get behind them. But then I thought about what's the alternative, right? they're going to stay there at the battle and they're going to possibly die in battle on the Enterprise. Like, what are they going to be, you know, in their rooms on the Enterprise? Or, you know, there can only be one person at ops, you know, when they're in the middle of a battle. So what's Detmer going to do? Hope that guy gets knocked out and take over for him. I don't know. So I thought, so on my second watching, I was a little more okay with the idea that everybody was like, hey, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, it especially with, you know, with the giveaway that Spock's gone with them.
Yes.
You know, what we get to anticipate, because there's this gigantic Chekhov's gun on the wall telling
Right.
you they're coming back. You get to anticipate, ooh, there's going to be this exciting fight. Both ships, you know, 2 combats, cutting back and forth. Is this crew does that, and that crew does this, as opposed to everyone being on one ship or the other, and then missing out on what else is going on or what could be going on.
So something I just thought about was Spock going along is that we see him in the next time on Enterprise Discovery, I mean, next time on Discovery, that he's in a shuttle. So maybe when his shuttle gets launched, he gets separated from Discovery, and so he's left behind with the Enterprise anyway. I mean, that's just another possibility. I guess we'll know next time how that all ends up working out. But that's possible. That Spock just gets separated from everybody and they go into the future alone. Tyler also decides that he can't go. He's got to stay and fight the good fight with Section 31. He wants to stop whatever this happening is again. So they have one more kiss, and then they separate. But this also gives him an idea, and he runs off to do something on his own. And then there's also this short amount of time, right? We got about 10 minutes or so. Pike even gives us the warning in the last scene with Tyler. You know, there's 11 minutes. So we got about 10 minutes, and everyone's, instead of doing their job and preparing for what's about to happen, they're all writing these nice long little blogs to and letters to all the people that they know. It's a fine little scene. I'm just giving it a hard time. But it's funny that you're like, okay, well, we got 10 minutes left. Let's not make sure everything's ready to go. It's like, no, I have to write a missive to my mom.
Yeah, you know, I always think that scenes like that are probably taking, you know, a cumulative, you know, 10 seconds, right?
Yeah.
But we're seeing them sequentially.
Yeah.
That some of this stuff might be inner monologue stuff. Like, you know, when I see my family again, I have to tell them this.
Yeah.
Or whatever. But, of course, you can't do inner monologues, right? Because they look weird as the character goes. And the actors talks over their, you know, their stuff, right? Yeah. I mean, you know, that doesn't work. This works character-wise. It's fantastic character-wise. Doesn't make a lot of sense plot chronology-wise.
Yeah.
But, you know, sometimes those things are in conflict, and I don't think it's the wrong choice to go with character.
No, I don't either.
And, you know, obviously there are other times where you want to go with plot, what makes sense in terms of plot, but I think this works well, so.
And it fills in, it shades in a lot of the stuff that we don't, it shades in a little more of some of these characters we don't know, right? Obviously we know who Saru's going to talk to, but for Detmer and for the other navigation girl whose name I've never learned, is, you know, we get a little more coloring into who they're talking to and what they're talking about. And Tilly, too. Oh, there are also 2 great uses of the Star Trek theme in this episode. You notice that? There's one right at the beginning when we're coming on, or when Spock first sees the Enterprise, we hear it going on. And then again at the end when Pike is on the bridge in the yellow, we hear it again. Dun, 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 dun. It was so great. I loved it. Pike has this amazing goodbye. It was just great. You know, it just him going and talking to everybody. And then, you know, telling Burnham, you know, I'm so glad I was here to watch you discover your heart. I thought that was really nice. Spock, there are no words. You know, that was great.
That was great. Yeah.
Yep.
Now,
what else is he going to say?
This might be a good time, to bring up the fact that there's been a Star Trek writing campaign for a Captain Pike Enterprise spinoff.
That's my next note. That's actually
fabulous,
my next note.
Right?
Yeah, I love it.
And so here I am on Anson Mount's Facebook page, where he has linked to the story at comicbook.com.
Yeah.
Star Trek Discovery fans petition for Captain Pike's spinoff set aboard the Enterprise. And he writes, I am humbled and deeply touched for this amount of love. I have never received such gratitude. Please know that my own gratitude at having been given the opportunity to walk in Captain Pike's boots is equaled only by that which I feel for the Trek family's devotion. Seriously, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
See, Anson Mont's just a nice guy.
He's a great guy. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see. I mean, if they're gonna do a Georgia, let's, and especially with these short treks.
Yeah.
You could do an 8 series, or a 12, or you could do whatever the story calls for.
Yeah.
And as we've talked about before, the idea that they're both out there never precludes coming back. We could see Culper again, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You could have a crossover episode in season 3 in which the Enterprise comes back, and they interact or something, and there's Culper and Spock and Pike and Number One, and
and the funny thing is too, as depending on how that, if that, please let that happen. But as the series goes along, you just start suddenly McCoy starts coming aboard, and suddenly we get Ensign Sulu, and you could really just start fleshing out all of those. Right, exactly. The commander in astrometrics, exactly.
And you could do the briefest things, because you could be like, we've got this new hotshot ensign in astrometrics. Mr. Sulu, what's your recommendation? And he has one line where you're like, Sulu!
Exactly. Yeah, I would love for that to happen. That would be amazing. That was literally my next note. Have you heard about people petitioning for Pike?
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, I love it.
Star Trek does have a long history of the petition.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it came back on the air. We'll get to that at the end of this season of the original series. So Pike is about to make Saru captain, and then Saru sort of sidesteps in we got a lot of other stuff to worry about. We'll talk about that if we survive all this. Lots of ins and outs to take care of, he basically says. Then we get another scene of technobabble, this time with Tilly, Stamets, and Reno.
I like how Reno is one of these kind of secondary recurring characters who they establish early on. She comes and goes, but here she is in the heart of this thing. She gets her own flash forward vision.
Yes, exactly, which we don't see, so I'm wondering if that becomes something very important, Well,
we do see enough that we get that torpedo lodged in the Enterprise's hull.
Yep, again,
we see that 3 times.
Yep. It's important for the next one.
But the thing is, you've got a lot of characters who are aware of it now.
Yeah.
Which means I can totally imagine, they thought it through. They're like, what do we do when that happens? And they're ready to go.
Yeah. Saru basically tells everybody who was going to get off Discovery to get off Discovery, but it makes me wonder how much more of the crew they got down there. How many decided to we're going with Discovery. The future's better than fighting this stupid battle. Right at the end, too, Georgiou tells Pike that he's Terran. I'm from the Mirror Universe, and Pike's like, what Mirror Universe? Wink.
That was hilarious.
I'm like, wait, so he knows about the parallel universe? What's going on here? We know he's well informed, but
we also have, the difference in that by this time in the original series, they were flying by the seat of their pants, making stuff up.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas we are so late in Star Trek lore now that it would be much harder to be nobody knows anything about it.
Yep. Then right at the end, we have Pike calling for shields as Section 31 arrives, and Saru then announces, prepare for battle! And then it goes to black. And you're like, you're getting to the best part.
It is. Oh. Total cliffhanger.
I know. It's great. I'm excited. All right. Well, let me get to some quick stuff from some of the reviews I read. IGN, which gave this a rating of 8.6, which is considered great, said, we glimpsed the red highlighted corridors of the ship back in the first episode of this season, but now we really get on board the Enterprise. Once Burnham, Pikes, and Saru got off the turbo lift with those hand grip thingies on the turbo lift, it was clear that the production designer and her team were going for classic touches of the old NCC 17001, no bloody A, B, C, or D. I thought that, but yeah, it was great to see the handholds. I forgot to mention that. That was amazing.
Yeah, so like she talked about how, in the series, you'd have these lights that would go up as they were, I guess, passing decks. Yeah. And that really didn't kind of make sense. So, but she did have an indicator in which you would get those lights going up to indicate you were going. So you felt like, oh, it's still there, even though, it's not like we're passing through floors.
Right, exactly. IGN also points out that the credits indicate that there is a Yeoman Colt on board the Enterprise, which is a character from The Cage.
Oh.
I know. But goes on to point out that I don't know which one she is. But that was kind of cool. Little Cage reference. Birth, Death, and Movies says this. Such Sweet Sorrow is the perfect title for this episode. Not only is it an episode full of partings, it's an episode full of the sweet sorrow that it implies. The writers and the cast pulled out some great work in creating an emotional climax for the season, certainly to be matched by the action climax we're going to get next week. By its cliffhanger ending, this episode ends up on a mixture of just-in-case character resolutions. I like that. Just-in-case character resolutions and heavily stupid plot setup. Next week looks to be all action all the time. Hopefully all the dumb plotting will pay off as cathartic as the character development we saw this week. Thought that was good. And lastly, I got good old Katie Burt, who's back on board with the show, from Den of Geeks, said this. After 2 seasons, Star Trek Discovery is so close to cutting itself free from the strings of pre-existing canon once and for all, with the ship poised to jump far into the future in order to keep the Sphere's knowledge from control. This show may be heading into something towards largely unexplored frontier for the franchise. After 2 seasons of living in the shadows of Star Trek stories that have come before, this time maybe Discovery has a chance for narrative freedom. And God, I hope they take it, she says.
Yeah. I mean, I always think that's people who want to escape Star Trek while watching Star Trek, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
That's like, I want to do a Hamlet without the Prince of Denmark, and there's no, we've seen all that before. Let's do that's what makes it Hamlet. Right.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if she's more about I want to get away from Star Trek and more about just getting out of the confines of canon. I think that's more of what she was saying.
Yeah, I always think that people want to escape canon way more than they ought to.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There's plenty of stuff to explore that's new, without having to let's escape canon.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like every part of the universe has already been mapped out and we know what's going on.
Yeah.
Right. So you can go new places and do new things and have the occasional Andorian show up.
Yeah.
You don't have to go, well, let's do Voyager. And we're going to be in a whole different quadrant and nobody we meet's familiar.
Yeah.
You don't have to go that far.
Well, that's it. That's all the notes I got. Anything else you wanted to hit on that we didn't get to?
Nope.
All right.
We gotta go.
It's funny because this was a slightly shorter episode, but for us, it's been a slightly longer episode. So definitely we had a lot to talk about this week. Next week, we will not only be hitting the finale of season 2, but we'll also be talking a lot about season 2 and our thoughts and feelings on said things. So tune in next week for that. Plus, you know where to find us. We're going to be on YouTube's for the video stuffs, and then on Spotify and Google Play and iTunes. We're all the places you want to find us. And maybe once we get back into the original series, we'll be finding a few more places I'll be able to hook us up on as well. So there you go. Anyway, as always, my name is Matt, coming to you from Austin, and from Houston is my brother Ken. Say goodbye, Ken.
Live long and prosper.
There we go, and we'll see everybody for the finale next week.